Hi guys, today I'll be talking about the difference between method and methodology. It's one of the key things that is used, key words that I use in research methods. We talk about research methods, we talk about methodology, and sometimes students, including me myself, have not been clear about the two. We tend to use them interchangeably. Sometimes we think methodology is something better. Sometimes methods is, we sometimes use methods meaning methodology. And many of our teachers and examiners will ask us, what is our methodology? And we might answer, what is our method? And they'll say, no, sorry, what is your larger methodology? And so what I'm going to do is just try to explain the difference between the two. And hopefully that you'll get a sense of how I'm defining these two words. And I hope that that will be a way of at least approaching this class, if not your future research. What I've noticed is that when you say research methodology and you look at books and you look at the definition between the two, many people define these two separately or differently. So rather than get lost in those multiple definitions, I'm going to give you one perspective which is my own, and hoping that that will give you a perspective of how to negotiate the following assignments, as well as understanding how to negotiate your classes and your class assignments in the future. And so this is how I will be defining. Methodology, the way I could use it is by defining it as a toolbox. It's a box which has all those tools that we keep in it. And the tools are like a screwdriver, a pair of scissors, nuts and bolts, all go inside this box. And those are small, again, like tools. The hammer, nails, which we use to make things, use to fix things, those are tools. The box is where we put all those tools in, right? So this is the box. And what I'm going to say is methodology is that box. Methodology is a box that contains many tools, many methods of approaching issues. And so I know this may not make sense right now because you're just looking at it theoretically and in an abstract way. And in class, we'll be doing a bit more workshops and hands-on exercises to understand the difference. But I want you to just see how I'm defining it. I'm defining methodology as an umbrella term, as a larger idea that contains many methods. And so that distinction is what I want you to keep. That there is a difference between method and methodology, and it is that methodology has many methods. So if somebody was to ask you, what is your methodology? They're asking you for an umbrella idea that contains definitely several methods of approaching something. Now in class, we would have talked about a paper, and we would have talked about how we write a paper. And let's say there's an issue that the paper is addressing, a problem, for instance, drug addiction in Nagaland, for instance, or persecution in Gujarat, or those are the practical issues, but perhaps in the theological issue, like what is the understanding of God in the Indian context, or what is the meaning of this text in the biblical sense, where there's a controversy. So there are certain problems or issues or things to discuss in our research, and we will have to write papers about them. We will have to write works that are supposed to do research, go to books, find different scholars, and come up with ideas that will solve the church issues, or the issues facing the church, or issues facing theology, or issues facing biblical studies. Now, to take an issue, we need a way to answer those issues. That's the way. And I'll just write it here. What is the way, the method, I'll just write that here, that you address issues? And I'll just write what I was saying, that any issue that we have, any issue or problem that we are addressing in a paper is addressed in a certain way, in a certain method. And what we're going to call call it, and I think the better way of calling it is, what is the methodology used to address your issue? Rather than simply the method. Because what you will find is that the more complex the issue, the more complex the methodology, how you are going to address this issue. You're going to have to do many things to answer one problem. So let's, for instance, take, I'm just thinking whether I should go theological or biblical, but perhaps let's take a practical problem, the issue of drug addiction in Nagaland. And this is perhaps let's take the idea that the young people, many from Christian backgrounds, are getting addicted to drugs. And that's a pastoral issue, that's an issue for the church. The church wants to find a solution or find a way of helping these addicts and also helping perhaps potential addicts, helping them get help. Now, notice what I said. I said that is a pastoral issue. So I gave it a word. I gave it a concept around which it is addressed. Now, drug addiction in Nagaland can be a sociological issue as well. It doesn't need to involve the church. It can be something that the government of India is concerned about. It could be something that a biblical person must want to think about what is addiction and looks in the Bible for addiction. Something that a theologian could look about is, I'm not actually sure what, but something about God and our relationship with God and our dependence on idols, on anything that does not, that replaces God. Or I could look at it as a missiological issue. I could look at it as an issue to reach out young people for mission, for evangelism. And yet, what I've done is, I've called it a pastoral issue. So, taking drug addiction in Nagaland and calling it a pastoral issue is one of the first steps towards identifying your methodology. Is to give your approach. In fact, I put the word approach as well because it's very useful. Approach, way, method. It's part of the approach, it's part of the way of your own subdiscipline. So some of you are pastoral students, some of you are biblical studies students, some of you are theological students, some of you are mission students. So each of you have a certain way of addressing the issue. That is your methodology. Okay? The way. But to say pastoral is only one part of your methodology. It's not your whole methodology. So the pastoral methodology can include, and I'm just going to go over here, the pastoral methodology can include empirical research, which means going to churches and asking for advice and finding out how the churches are addressing this issue. So empirical research would be probably talking to churches. They would also probably talk to addicts themselves. And so churches and talking to addicts and probably getting the data from the ground. So, in fact, let me just put it. Data from the context. So this is data from the context. And to have a pastoral issue, one way of doing a pastoral paper on this issue would be empirical research. So that's one method as part of my methodology. Interviews, surveys, government files, data, all the data that I can get through empirical research. Also, what I will do as addressing this pastoral issue of drug addiction in Nagaland would be perhaps scholarly research. And I don't have like empirical research and non-empirical research. That's something that we call, but rather than just call it non-empirical research, just scholarly research, where we go to books and libraries and get data. Now here in scholarly research, if I was doing it as a pastoral paper, as a paper within the pastoral theology methodology, then the scholars I use will be pastoral scholars. Scholars who are aware of the church, who are aware of the issues facing the church, who are aware of drug addiction, who are aware of counseling methodologies. Similarly, I will talk to theologians as well. I will look at what other theologians or non-pastoral people have to say. Perhaps missiologists, and so on and so forth. What do they have to say about this issue? What is the view of God? What is the view of drugs? Perhaps I will talk to medical personnel. And this is not necessarily with Christians. Medical personnel of the dangers of drug addiction, or what is drug addiction. Talking to medical scholars, and talking what I mean is going through the books, going through that research. So you have a range of scholarly research that you're doing. So the method applies to empirical research, where you go to what are you going to use surveys, are you going to use interviews, who are you going to interview, what kind of questions will you ask. That is the empirical part of your methodology. Then you have the non-empirical part, where you go to scholarly research, you have your pastoral, theological, medical personnel. You also have something which in the theological framework, where you do theological studies rather than secular studies, would be the normative framework, or I'll just put it over here because I think we'll all understand what it means when we say the Bible. What does the Bible have to say? What is normative in all this? Now, the Bible may not have much to say directly about addiction in Nagaland, but it has certain principles, or it has certain ideas which inform how we look at our empirical research and our scholarly research. So the Bible has a way of directing our ideas about God, that God loves everyone, for instance. We believe, and I just put Bible theology over here, because it's a bit more than just biblical studies. It's more how it all works together. So we have the Bible and we have theology. The idea of who is God? Does God care for the drug addict? So many people believe that God cares for drug addicts. When it says God loves the world, God, the view of God over here, that He loves the world, will inform our solution, will inform how we address this issue. So, how am I going to address this issue of drug addiction in Nagaland? My way will be empirical, my way will be scholarly, my way will be theological, in the sense that I will use biblical and theological understandings to shape how I determine what information is useful for helping empirical research. For instance, there are cultures that look at drug addiction as some stigma, and they don't talk about it, and they don't deal with it, or they separate the drug addict from their context. But the biblical model values the church, and the church must address this issue and help the person within the church to address this issue, and help the parents in the church to address this issue. So therefore, the Bible, theology, has a normative function in how we do research for this issue, for this topic. Now, we could go on and on and on about the multiple aspects of method, like this empirical method, the scholarly method, the biblical method, and there are many ways to address this one issue. Now, going back to this image of this box, this whole thing is our methodology. Everything is about how we address one issue, one topic. So when people ask, what is my methodology, they're actually asking all of these things. What are the ideas that shape your thinking? What is the methodology you will use to gather data? Are you going to use non-empirical data? Are you going to use empirical data? There are other things that are also part of our methodology, which includes presuppositions. And presuppositions are also part of our methodology. They shape how we look at things. Presuppositions include evangelical framework, that I believe that the Bible is true, that presuppositions include that Jesus is the way, that God has answers, that God loves. These are presuppositions informed hopefully by Bible and theology, but these presuppositions shape the way we address these issues, the way that we talk about these issues. So all this is part of our methodology. So in our methodology chapter, or the methodology section of our papers, we need to be aware of all these issues, of all these methods, as part of our larger methodology. And I think that, if you look at it like that, when somebody asks you for your methodology, they're not asking for one sentence. They're asking for your sense that you have about how all these methods work together. That could be one sentence, but they're not talking about one method, but they're talking about how all these methods are working together to address this issue. In my experience, I don't think one sentence has ever been able to capture my methodology. Like, I can't simply say my methodology is biblical, and as if that's the end, because it's not just biblical and theological, it is also empirical, or for instance, it's also scholarly. And not just scholarly, perhaps within these theologians, I will prioritize one or two theologians. I will use their thinking to shape my paper. So I'm not just using scholarly research, but I'm using particular scholarly research. That too is part of my method. That too is part of how I am addressing this issue. In fact, I can write how. As you can see, the board can become more and more complex as we think about methodology and method. But let me summarize over here. The goal of this video lecture was simply this: understand the difference between method and methodology. And how I am defining method or methods is ways, approaches, methods, the house of how we approach an issue at hand. And of course, another idea of what is an issue, and all, we'll be talking about that later or earlier. But the idea of issues addressed in a certain way, that is our method, the method. The larger umbrella term that holds all our methods together can be referred to our methodology. Now, let me stress again that this is not how everybody defines method and methodology. They have different ways of defining it. But I think for the sake of this class, and perhaps for the sake of your studies, you can think about this distinction, that methodology includes a plurality of methods. And so therefore, any complex issue may need 2 or 3 methods to address it. So I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you.